welcome to another episode of Boring History. My name is Angela and today we're going to be having a look at the Achaean League. Achaea was a region in the Peloponnese and we're given the names of the 12 main cities in this region by Herodotus. And it's these 12 cities that came together to form a religious and military alliance that became known as the Achaean League. Now, in the earlier periods of ancient history, so say like the classical period, Achaea doesn't really appear to be super involved in any of the major happenings. For example, it doesn't appear as though Achaea participated in the Persian Wars, and they only occasionally pop up in the records of some of the other wars. Which begs the question, if this place was indeed such a minor player, why would we even bother to look at the Achaean League? And to answer this question, the first thing that we have to understand is that there were actually two phases or types or eras of the Achaean League. The first phase of the league occurs in the classical period, and the second phase falls into what's known as the Hellenistic period. The first Achaean League lasted until the late 4th century BC, and it's originally introduced to us by the historian Thucydides as an ally of Athens in 453 BC. It's also worth mentioning that Achaea was an ally of Sparta for the majority of this 4th century period. Except for this one time in 366 BC where they were persuaded to break ties with Sparta. But this separation didn't last for long, and by the late 360s, Achaea and Sparta had kissed and made up and were back together in the form of an alliance. The first Achaean League fell apart with the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC. And to be honest, that's about all we need to know about the early years of Achaea and the Achaean League. Which brings us to phase 2 of the Achaean League, which is put together in around 280 BC. Now at this point there were only 10 surviving cities of the original 12. However, the loss of these two cities is not such a big deal because this second phase of the Achaean League is much more inclusive, meaning it's happy to let some non-Achaean regions join in the fun. Initially, the Achaean League was under the control of 2 generals who were called Strategoi, but this changed to having only 1 general at the head of the league in around 255 BC. This Strategoi position was an annually elected position that was chosen from the League's army. So if we remember that the League was made up of all these different types of armies or regions, this would have been seen as a fair way to elect who gets to be the boss. Now next down the chain of command there was an administrative board which was made up of 10 members. And it was these 10 members who presided over the assemblies of the other alliance city-states. Then by the mid-3rd century, the League finds itself being led by this dude called Aratus of Sicyon. And if you're looking at anything to do with the Achaean League, this is a name that will pop up fairly regularly, and he's a fairly important dude to be aware of. So I think it's worth having a quick chat so we can find out precisely who this Aratus actually was. Due to your usual ancient type of political scheming and plots, Aratus was left an orphan at 7 years old, and essentially he managed to escape being killed and went to live with a friend of a friend of a friend, or something like that. He was quite intelligent and he was also pretty good at sport, and he even managed to win a victory wreath for like a decathlon or something like that at one point in time. He was elected to be the head of the Achaean League 17 times. Aratus led the league through a whole heap of campaigns and military victories. And if you're into that type of thing, you can read all about it in Plutarch's Aratus. Now, it's been suggested that Aratus was actually murdered by King Philip V of Macedon. Apparently, Philip was annoyed that Aratus was cramping his style because he was insisting that he placate some civil wars that were happening. And there were also some issues with Rome, and then this one time Aratus refused to help the king on one of his campaigns. It's just being absolutely impossible to live with. And all of this annoyed Philip so much that he ordered one of his officers called Tarian to secretly poison Aratus. Now, it's actually suggested by Plutarch that Aratus kind of worked out that he'd been poisoned by Philip. But by the time he worked it out, it was already too late, so he was just resigned to his fate and pretty much went, meh, what are you gonna do? This is what you get for being friends with a king. And he just sculled the last of the poison drink and died. Now, just as an FYI, there's no actual proof that this is actually how he died, but Plutarch definitely thought that it made for a good story. With his death, we get another example of just how popular Aratus had become because the Ciconians, who were the people of Sicyon, the birthplace of Aratus, can't remember if I mentioned that. Anyway, the Ciconians insisted that Aratus be buried inside their city, which doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize that the Ciconians actually had an ancient law that stated that nobody was allowed to be buried within the city walls, and they actually had to get special permission. And and they actually had to get special permission from Delphi to be allowed to entomb Aratus's body within the city. Okay, so now that we've covered Aratus, let's jump back to the second phase of the Achaean League. As I mentioned before, the second phase of the Achaean League was much more inclusive, which meant that they could invite more members to join. And the primary focus of the Achaean League was to expel the Macedonians and restore Greek rule in the Peloponnese. This anti-Macedonian philosophy also meant that our illustrious leader Aratus kept the league out of the Roman-Macedonian wars. And what this did was actually bolster the relationship between the league and the ever-increasingly powerful Rome, to the point where the Romans actually brought the majority of the Peloponnese under the control of Achaea. However, all good things must come to an end, and it got to the point where the league kind of felt that Rome was trying to interfere too much in its affair, and the relationship between the league and Rome began to crumble. One example of this can be found when we see that Sparta at one point got so annoyed at the Achaean League's dominating tendencies that they appealed to the Roman Senate for assistance. Rome tried its best to act as a mediator, essentially insisting that Sparta be allowed to leave the league, but the whole scenario didn't kind of work out that well, so the whole relationship began to crumble. And what did this mean for the league? Well, a war between the League and Rome broke out in 146 BC. Rome won and the Achaean League was dissolved. The end. Well, not really, because a smaller version of the League does pop up again, so I guess technically there is a phase 3, but for today, I think we've had enough. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and maybe you'll consider subscribing because I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.